of the challenges of owning these old classic cars, particularly if you own more than one, is finding the time to drive them enough. It's not just getting out and starting it up and running it for 10 minutes. It's actually driving it, and driving it a distance. And it's probably been a while since you've seen my 280 SL Happier. Well, that's because it's been parked away in storage. And I just have not had enough time to drive enough, so this past week I said, okay, it's time to get old Happy up on the lift to do some inspection and service. And sure enough, look what I got. I have dragging brakes. A number of years ago, calipers were replaced, rotors were replaced, flexible hoses were even replaced, and it's gotten a couple of brake fluid flushes over the years, but it hasn't been driven. And this is the big problem. You need to drive these old cars or you're going to end up having brake problems. And I'm going to show you in this video why. It's not a matter of just changing brake fluid. People feel like, well, gee, I've got my car in storage. If I just change the brake fluid every couple of years, I'll be fine. No. And I'll show you why as we pull these calipers off and take them apart so you can see why I have this problem right now. When inspecting your disc brakes for a dragging situation, primarily meaning you can't hardly rotate the rotor by hand with the tire and wheel off, don't assume that it is sticking pistons in this caliper here. It could be the flexible brake hose, particularly if they're old. These should probably be replaced about every 15 years. What happens is these rot internally and they'll actually become like a check valve. You can force hydraulic fluid through the hose, but it won't return and it won't allow the caliper to open up and the disc to turn freely. So before you start tearing into your calipers, if you see your hoses are old, this is what you want to do to test if it is a problem with the hoses. If they're old and cracked, just replace them. But these hoses have been recently replaced, so I'm not going to assume it's the hose, but you never know. So what you want to do is open up this bleeder fitting, and if it's the hose, when you open up this bleeder fitting, you'll be able to turn the rotor. Follow me? So I'm going to just break this loose about half a turn. Okay, let's see if that makes any difference. No, it's still dragging on the pads. The next thing I'm going to do is remove these pins and the pads, and then I'll be able to test whether or not I can get the pistons to move in the caliper. I took a hammer and punched the two pins out on this Ate caliper and removed the clip, and right away I noticed there's a problem here. This is a really good indicator that we probably have a piston on this outboard side of the caliper that's sticking. Look at the difference in the wear of the two pads. This one is almost worn all the way down. This one's still down, but still acceptable. So you've got this huge difference in wear between the two pads, usually indicates that one of these pistons is dragging more than the other one. That one's moving a little bit, but that one's not moving at all. So I'm going to try to spread the pads so I can get them out, and I use a pry bar to do this with, but I'm going to loosen up the bleeder fitting so that when I spread these pads out, excess go into my capture bottle. It's not going to go up and overfill my master cylinder. So let's see if we can get these to spread a little bit. Okay, there you can see the fluid going out. So this one's moving. Look at that. You can just spread that out and pull that right out. This one is not. So I'm going to have to put the pad back in there. See if I can get this to move at all. That outboard piston is literally seized, so I'm not going to be able to get this pad out until I remove the caliper. That's a really good example of the type of issues you will run into on these old cars that don't get driven a lot. At this point, I've got to pull all four calipers. I don't want to take a chance just because you take these out and it's kind of okay. You're not going to fix this by driving it. I've seen these rotors get red hot from dragging brakes, so don't take a chance. If you've got dragging brakes like I've shown you here, you're going to have to pull the calipers out and either get rebuilt calipers or put reseal kits in these. When I get one of these apart, I'm going to show you the reason why those pistons end up dragging and sticking the way they do. So finally, we got the last piston out on this front caliper, and some of these were really tough. Now the purpose of this video is not to show you how to rebuild your brake calipers. I've got other videos and other resources on my website. The main purpose of this video is to show you why your brakes will end up dragging if you don't drive the car enough. And I want to show you this. A lot of people think that, well, something's rusted inside the caliper, and it's not. Even the pistons, they're a little gummed up here, but they're not rusty. These are coated. And now I'm going to take you over to these other ones. Here is the other front. And if you look in here, look where the rust is. The rust is not inside the caliper, it's actually on the outside of the seal. And that rust is what clamps down on these pistons and causes them to drag or seize. When it gets real bad, like look at these back ones, look at the amount of rust you see right there. Notice the rust is outboard of the seal. So you can see that it's not going to matter if you just change your brake fluid every year, because changing brake fluid is not going to solve that problem here. This is a problem due to inactivity and moisture collecting behind that seal. And if you look at the pistons, they're in great shape. So I think many people think that it's rusting inside the caliper that's causing the problem. No, it's right there. And this is a classic reason why you need to drive your old classic car. Driving the car and driving it at least an hour, probably at least every 30 days, and getting out to where you're driving stop and go will heat this up, and any moisture in here, it'll evaporate it out, plus it'll give the piston the exercise it needs to prevent this rust from forming. So I think now you look at all these calipers I need to rebuild, I think I'll be more motivated to drive happier more often in the future. The new calipers have been rebuilt and are back on happier. Rebuilding these is not expensive, provided they're rebuildable. Sometimes they're too rusty and you can't fix it. But it's the time to get all that rust out. If this doesn't motivate you, or it doesn't motivate me to drive this car more often, I don't know what will. But now, with the new pads in, I can move the hub like this, and then it'll lock up. Look at that, locks up. Now I'm going to have my helper release, and as soon as he releases the pedal, it should go right back to easy movement. So this is the ultimate test now, and this is what your brakes should behave like if they're in good condition. You should be able to just take the wheel and spin it like this. Then I'm going to have my helper hit the brake. Look at that, lock up solid. Now he's going to release the brake, and as soon as he releases the brake, there should be no hesitation, but this should go right back to spinning like this. If it drags a lot, then you have a problem. So this is going to be part one in my series, why you should drive your classic car at least every 30 days for 1 hour and stop and go traffic. In part two, we're going to cover another issue, but I feel that the brakes is one of the big ones, so that's why it was part one. I'm sure many of you who've followed my videos know the name of this car is Happier. Well, I'm really happy today after taking this thing out on a road test, after replacing the shock absorbers and redoing all the brakes. Man, I can't believe it. The acceleration, how long have those brakes been dragging? But the acceleration is amazing. And I have to admit, I'm very impressed with those KYB shocks I installed in this thing. I've always put Bilsteins in, but the KYBs are a little stiffer on both the downstroke and the upstroke, and I think I like it. So over really rough ground, I think it feels a little more solid, but you know, shocks are a personal opinion, a personal thing, just like engine oil. But it's the brakes that really impress me. Now, is this gonna motivate me? Do you think it will, folks? It'll motivate me to drive happier every 30 days for at least an hour and get it out on the road where I'm exercising the brakes. Don't just get on the freeway. And I know some of you are going to say, well, Kent, I live back in Chicago or New York or Philadelphia and they salt the roads all winter and I can't drive every 30 days. And I understand that. Do your best. But here's my recommendation. At least try to pull it out of the garage every 30 to 60 days and just drive it up and down your driveway, hitting the brakes back and forth. Get it out. Get that engine hot. Don't just start it and run it for 5 minutes. That gets condensation in your exhaust system. You'll lose your exhaust muffler. You'll find out in the spring there'll be a hole in it. Run the engine long enough so that it gets up to full engine temperature and drive it up and down your driveway. Now, if you can't do that, I'm going to recommend that you at least take the car and put it up on blocks, because in the third part in this series, we're going to talk about other issues of lack of use, and one of those is tires. You want to avoid those flat spots in your tires from letting it sit too long. So you could put it up on blocks if it's going to be more than 3 months. You know, have your friend come out and pump the brakes while you spin the tires. Maybe that'll help a little bit. And I understand it's not possible to drive it for an hour every 30 days. But if you want to keep it in tip-top shape, I need to follow my own advice with this car right here.